Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Let's Talk Cars podcast in association with the Holcroft Motor Group. And today we have a very special guest with us, star of Auto Social UK YouTube channel and Electroheads. It's Natisha Chatten. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, I'm all good. I'm enjoying the sunshine for once.
Yeah, I know, for once. It's finally starting to shine.
Yeah, finally. We're finally getting to summer, which for us content creators makes it ideal weather.
Yeah, as long as it's not too sunny.
True.
Then that poses its whole different issues.
There's nothing worse than when you open a car door when it's been sunny and it's like a sauna.
I know. I think last year on the hottest day of the year, I was filming an Astra and it read something mad like 52 degrees or something in the car.
Anyway, so like I said in the intro, you are a star of Auto Social and Electroheads YouTube channel. So I just want to talk more about how you got into that position. So take me back to the start of your career. How did you get into being a car content creator?
Okay, so everything really started. I haven't got this like really long, exciting history with cars where like somebody was the person who influenced me. Like it was something I always knew I had a personal interest in, and then it just kind of grew on its own. So my interest in cars was always there underlying, but there's not a story of it being in like my family or anything like that. But essentially, I actually just used to work at Costa, and I knew I wanted more than working for Costa. And I wanted to do something to do with like digital marketing or social media. And I'd done a few courses, and then I knew I also liked cars. And that was kind of the jobs that I'd been applying for. And I saw a job as a social media executive at a car dealership. So I thought, I'll give that a go. I'll go for an interview. Really enjoyed the interview, went really well, and then so I started working there. And at the time, they were pretty infamous. Probably about 5 years ago, and they were quite well known in the industry because they were the biggest used car dealer on Facebook when Facebook was like the big platform. And and they just stuck me in front of a camera. And they quite enjoyed obviously seeing the responses to people, seeing somebody on camera. It was a bit more engaging. But they never gave me much time to prepare when it came to things like that. So they'd kind of say like, right, Tish, you've got 5 minutes. I want you to go and talk about this car in the showroom. And as much as I liked being in front of camera, that stressed me out because I was like, I want to portray that I know all the information about this car, and 5 minutes is just not enough time to kind of be able to do that. And actually that dealership ended up going under, and I lost my job. And I was kind of scrambling to think, well, what am I going to do next? And I thought, well, the response to all the video content I've been doing for them has been really, really positive, but I want to kind of take ownership of that on my own. So that's when I started Auto Social back then, when I lost that job. And at the time, I didn't really know where I was going to take things. And I actually got a full-time job working at Volkswagen as a sales executive. And then just like slowly, besides working at Volkswagen in sales, I started growing the channel whilst I was working there. So some of the first videos that are on my channel are pretty much all Volkswagens because that's when I worked for the brand. So a couple of years of working there, trying to do things side by side. I never really enjoyed sales that much. So then I just decided eventually that I wanted to take the channel full time. So I kind of slowed down my role at Volkswagen and then just put everything I had into the channel.
So you say like you first got into sort of the car industry when you left Costa. So obviously you've now become a successful car content creator. Do you think that to be a successful content creator, you have to be really passionate about the subject, or do you think that somewhat comes over time?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. The thing is I will never take on content that I'm not super excited about. There has been kind of like talks that the company that I have been doing a little bit of work for wanted to get me into bikes. But I just don't have that same interest in bikes that I do have about cars. And I think you don't realise how important you don't realise how important it is to have a passion in what you're creating content with until you try to create content on something you're not interested in, and then you're like, God, this is actually really tough. So I do think you definitely have to have a passion about what you're talking about for it just to sound natural. I think if you're a very, very good actor, you could probably talk about anything. But for me, it's much, much easier and it's much more engaging. The content that I create is much better when it's a product that really interests me.
Yeah, I think that really reflects in both the Autosocial and the Electroheads. And obviously, I just wanted to point out the fact that Electroheads has just reached 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. So
yes,
congratulations
they have,
on that.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
So, and obviously your Autosocial channel, which is your own one, is over 32,000 now. So you are a successful content creator in your own right. So well done on that. For any content creators out there, I mean, I'm only a year into my content creation career, so I'm still open for tips. What do you think makes a successful content creator? Do you think there's any avenues to go down to get exposure? Or is it somewhat just sticking at it?
For sure, it's just sticking at it. You just got to try different things. You've got to find your niche, what makes you special, what do people respond well to in terms of your content, and just kind of open up that channel of feedback between you and the consumers and realise, like, right, what are people enjoying? What parts of my content are people liking? And just, like, literally the main thing is just have fun with it. As long as you're having fun with it, that's going to show when you're finally, like, your content comes together. It will be so obvious when you're talking about something that you find really interesting, and people will resonate with that and people will enjoy that as well. But just persistence as well, that's like the main key thing. When I speak to people, you cannot expect, I mean, I'm sure you find this as well, you cannot just put one video up and then just expect it to do well and just sit back and say, right, okay, I'm not going to do anything for 2-3 like weeks now or months at a time. You have to really get a consistent schedule in place and stick to that consistent schedule so that people know, right, okay, this person's posted on this day for the past 2 weeks. I want to follow their journey because I'd like to see on a regular, like, kind of what they're creating. So I think it's a balance of having fun with the content and staying consistent.
And I think as well, it is that sense of perseverance. What I've found, it does seem a bit disheartening when you put, a lot of work into a video, it goes up and it doesn't do as well as you would expect, but then might be enough that it does unexpectedly well. So I think that sense of perseverance is what I've found in my short time being a content creator.
Yeah, for sure. I always say that to everyone. It's never the content that you think's going to do well. It will always surprise you. It's always something completely random. Especially, I don't know if you've found, but there's no correlation between, like, it being like a really fancy supercar or like something really ultra expensive or something that's like at the entry level. In fact, I think for like both our channels, if I've kind of like kept an eye on yours as well, it's that obtainable content that actually does better. The cars that people can afford, the cars that people like, they want genuine kind of answers to their questions. It's those that tend to do a lot better. People always say to me like, oh, why aren't you doing like Audi R8s and various like really expensive kind of supercars? But for me personally, stuff like that never does that well on the channel.
Yeah, we've personally found that because our most viewed video is with the Dacia Duster, which is, sort of an everyday affordable car. So I think it is that sense of people want to relate to a video as much as people might want to watch a Lamborghini and sort of aspire to own that. If they're not going to ever realistically own one, then it's that sense of it, yeah, you're not relatable to many people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I completely agree.
So obviously you've experienced a lot of cars, all shapes, all sizes, from the affordable ones to the supercars of the world. And we talked about that sense of having a passion for the content that you're putting out. Has there been any cars that you've come across where you've been like, this is going to be a bit of a struggle for me to really show a passion for this car, and you've not really been a fan of it? And how would you get through that video?
Not particularly. I think there's always, I'm quite surprised sometimes by a lot of cars, and sometimes I worry about that sometimes. Actually, most recently, I did a bit of content on the smart #1.
Yeah.
And before I kind of like played around with that car and was working out things about it, like my own like preconceptions of that car was, oh, it's just an electric SUV. Like, how am I going to find something different to talk about on this car when essentially it's the same as like every other electric SUV that I've driven? And I think it's just that proves that it's so important to put those misconceptions aside, because it completely shocked me. And there was so many interesting things about that car, so many things that made it different from everything I'd already tested. And I guess it's just finding the joy in different cars. But I can genuinely, hand on heart, say that there has hardly been a single car that I've kind of struggled to be positive about, or to find an interest in something to do with it. There's one standout car that I'd probably say is and I don't mind saying it, it's probably my least favourite car that I've tested for a long time, just because I found it hard to justify a price tag. And that's the thing with electric cars, that a lot of the time they come with like a much higher price tag that's harder to justify. And for me, that was the Toyota BZ4X.
Yeah.
I know there is so many people that like it, but for me personally, I just couldn't find anything that made that car stand out compared to like other cars that are currently on the market at the time. And like some of the figures were behind, and I get to kind of test a lot of electric cars. And for me, like, I notice when cars are kind of rapid charging at a slower rate. And that's possibly the only car that I found to not kind of agree with. Like, I didn't really like it. I didn't get on with it. It didn't suit my needs. And that's possibly, but then I'm lucky because I don't need to be positive about the cars. I'll always share the positives and the negatives. But yeah, I was just completely honest when it came to that review. But the best thing about reviews is, just because it doesn't work for me doesn't mean it's not going to work for you, or it's going to work for somebody else. And that's the thing that everybody has to remember. Like, just because I don't like it, if you love it, that's great. Like, I'm really glad that car works for you. It just doesn't personally work for me.
Yeah, exactly. And I found that when I started out in reviews, I was trying to big up all the small points, make it sound the best car in the world. But realistically, you do just need to get information out there. If it don't work for you, it doesn't work for you. Someone else might look at it and think, yeah, that does work for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's especially like looking at both our content that we create, because we both come from like, so I started off doing a lot of dealer presentations as well. And the difference with dealer presentations is, at the end of the day, the key is that we want to sell cars. That's the big thing. Like, we want to drive sales. But I think people are starting to realise now that you need to highlight those negatives for people to have that trust in you, because at the end of the day, it takes 5 minutes to do a Google search to find a lot of issues with some cars. Like, it charges at a slower rate, the range is not great, and by not mentioning that, it's very dishonest to like an audience, because they're going to think, well, that's the big thing about this car that everyone's saying, and people are going to comment it down below. So it's important to kind of highlight those things, because most of the time there are positives that outweigh the negatives. But by hiding them, it shows that you're dishonest, when actually, if you're highlighting those kind of slight negatives about the car, it builds up that rapport.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I found as well. But I'm glad you've got onto EVs, because I did want to touch about, you present on the Electroheads YouTube channel, and obviously you do reviews on all the EVs on there. I just want to get your opinion on electric vehicles. I assume you are a big fan, because before I started working, I wasn't the biggest fan of EVs. I didn't necessarily see the point in them in this day and age. I thought maybe it should be in a few years' time, but over the last year, my opinion's really changed. So I just want to get your opinions on EVs and how they have progressed the car market.
So personally, I am a big advocate for EVs. Obviously, working for Electroheads, I drive a lot of electric cars, and the ultimate goal is to get more people into sustainable energy. We never hide the fact that there are currently issues within the industry when it comes to electric cars. Of course, I know full well it creates a lot of emissions to be able to create the electric car in the first place. But on Electroheads, they've got a big kind of movement in terms of electric mobility, and it's a lot about like smaller electric bikes, and we really try and focus on the cars which are like slightly more sustainable, who are focusing on like a carbon neutral of the factories that they're creating them in. I think personally for me, I would say that I think electric cars can be absolutely brilliant for like 90% of motorists in the UK who are doing, I think it's like, is it an average of people do like 5,000 miles a year? Which to me personally, when I do like, I probably do 30, 40,000 miles a year, which is like insane. And that's way, way, way above the norm of what people do. And if I can make it attainable to spend time with electric vehicles, it goes to show that it's going to be so easy for people that don't do that kind of mileage. But what I will say, and is something that I'm currently in the works of doing, is I do currently think it is not a good idea to own an electric vehicle without an at-home charge point. That is one thing I'll always say. And I'll speak to people about that. And if people are thinking of changing to electric cars for company cars, and they're saying, but I need to rely on the network, it's just, you just can't, because that person's going to have a bad experience. So why try and encourage that person to drive an electric car when I know they're going to have a negative experience when it comes to having to rely on public charging? Because it is too expensive. It needs to come down. The price needs to be reduced. It's not always reliable. Obviously, you have got the chances of you turn up and it doesn't work, or that there's other people there. But if you have that at-home charging, it completely takes away that worry of going to those charge points. And you won't really have to do that if you're doing long journeys. And what do people do them? Probably 3-4 times a year in their kind of their town car as such, because most people do have a car for different journeys. So yeah, do I think that we are there with electric cars? No. Like, I think there's so much that we need to learn. The industry needs to kind of pick up. Obviously, we've currently seen a big dip in like resale values of EVs. I think that's been a huge knock-on effect of a lot of people kind of moaning about the networks. But at the end of the day, if you have an at-home wall box, if you are doing short journeys, it can be fantastic.
Yeah, and exactly that's what I found, because I did a video on the Megane E-Tech where I took it out for a week, and I was an EV owner for a week, and obviously I was relying off the public charging network, and the main issue I found was going to a place to charge the car, and there was only two, and they were both busy, and I had to then sit there and wait 40 minutes waiting for one to come free. If I did have a home charger or could charge at work, I would 100% go for an EV. But it is that sense of the public charging network just isn't sustainable at this moment in time.
Yeah, definitely.
So they're on EVs, obviously, because in 2030 they can't sell petrol or diesel brand new cars. Do you think that is achievable? You know, of your expertise of the EV world, do you think in 2030 that will get a go-ahead?
I have concerns that there will be pushbacks on that to an extent. There will be a bit of a lenience when it comes to probably hybrids or different forms of mobility, just because how it currently is, it doesn't work for some people. That it is a real struggle. We need a lot more rapid chargers if something like that is going to work, just because there are people, sometimes like I'm doing way over like kind of 500 miles a day, and that is hard when you have to then kind of account for the fact that you need to charge. I think there are going to be some things that will come in place between that time which will change, but I think it won't stop the rapid kind of intake with electric vehicles. And I think more people will go to electric. There'll be more things put in place. There'll be more kind of like schemes. But I guess the problem is like, we're getting closer and closer to 2030, but we feel further away from what was positive about them in the first place, because like 2 years ago, you could get your government grants, you were getting at-home charge points fitted with the cars for buying them, you had no road tax, and then you had obviously the fact that you could charge them for like quite a low rate as well. So it's difficult to kind of feel like we're moving in the right direction, because I think a lot needs to happen between that time. But like, if you look at what's happened in the past 2 years, we're still quite a way away from that 2030. And I think so much can happen and we can move so far in that time. It's hard to even keep track of where we will be by then.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to see how it pans out over the next few years. Like you said, 3 years ago, EV market was nowhere near what it is now. You see so many more brands bringing out more and more models. So it could be achieved by 2030, but it will be interesting to see how that pans out. But moving away from EVs, I want to talk about your experience with cars. So, I spoke on a previous podcast about my first car, a small Mini Cooper, which in the year I had it, I spent more in repairs than it was actually worth. So I wanted to just talk about, what was your first car?
So my first car was I don't know, that's a bit of a tricky one. My first car that I actually drove, in terms of when I passed my test, was a Volkswagen Lupo, which I do now own a Volkswagen Lupo GTI. So I've kind of always stuck to my love of those cars. But my actual first car, before that, the first car that I ever owned when I still had my provisional license, was my stepdad came home with, well, I'd actually asked for an MG ZR. And that was my dream car. I wanted an MG ZR, a Suzuki Swift Sport, or a Lupo GTI. That's the 3 cars I asked for. And my stepdad came home with a Rover 25. And he was like, this is going to be your first car. And I hated it. I absolutely detested this car. I couldn't drive it. I stalled it absolutely everywhere we went. And yeah, I basically, it was my money as well. Like, he hadn't just bought me a car. Like, he'd taken my money and bought me a car with the money. So don't think I'm ungrateful of being like, oh, I don't want that car. It was my money, and I was like, that's not something I asked for. But yeah, after I could not drive this car whatsoever, I kind of begged and pleaded that he changed it for something, and that's when we swapped the Rover 25 for the Volkswagen Lupo. And I think that's obviously had quite an effect on my car buying future, considering I've kind of always stuck with Volkswagens, apart from obviously when I dabbled in having the Abarth and had a BMW for a time. But yeah, I have an obsession with small sporty cars. They're like the smaller the better, really.
I'm like that, so I went for Mini and then went for the Kia Picanto GT, and then now I currently drive a Peugeot 208 GT.
Okay, yeah.
So I just think like a small, sporty, like hatchback type car is sort of my go-to. But then when I've been working in the car industry, I found it hard to have like a real burning desire for one car, because I'm looking at different cars all day. I'm seeing all new ones come out. You're driving different cars all the time. I find it hard to stick with a car that I really like. And that's what I've really found, because I've only had this car 6 months and I already want another one.
Yeah.
Do you find that? Do you find you get bored of cars just because you've seen so many different ones?
I feel like I have quite a practical mind when it comes to cars. I mean, the luckiest thing about me is I'm now in a position where I can get press cars, which is like the best thing ever, because obviously I get to have loans of brand new cars from press for like weeks on a time. But I have no desire to have this really expensive car. My opinion with cars is probably warped from a lot of content creators that you'll find out there. I have I guess I'm probably quite tight. So I have a far more like practical mind when it comes to cars. Like, I don't want this really expensive car burning a hole in my pocket that looks great. And I guess, like, I don't need something which is like a symbol for social media to prove that I'm doing well. Like, for me, that's never ever been an importance. For me, I take pride in the fact that my car is like super fun. Obviously, at the moment I have a Volkswagen Up GTI. And I personally think there is nothing out there which does what my car does, in terms of it cost me like, I got a loan for it because, I didn't want to throw away like all my savings in a car. Like, I'd rather just pay monthly. But I pay £200 a month for that car. It gets 50 miles per gallon. It's amazing fun because it is ultimately a GTI at the end of the day. So it's like brilliant fun. Manual gearbox, so it's really engaging. And it's so solid. Like, it's cost me absolutely nothing since I've owned it. And yeah, I can't argue with that. I don't know why I would want to spend like thousands of pounds a month on a car that ultimately I just need to get me from A to B.
So we're coming to the end of this week's episode of Let's Talk Cars podcast. So I just want to sort of throw it out for all the experience you've had with cars. I want you to say what you think the most practical car you've experienced, the best looking and the best driving experience.
Okay, so the most practical, best looking and the best driving experience. Okay, so the most practical...
I feel like I'm putting you on the spot here.
Well, I just think, like, can you really get more practical than the new Dacia Jogger? Like,
Exactly. Yep. I've
what a
experienced that
car!
firsthand.
What
It
a
is very
car!
practical.
Other than the fact, of course, you don't really want to be putting children right in those back seats, but other than that, like, I think I'm very easily like simple things make me very happy, and the fact that I think I timed that I could get those seats out from the back of the Dacia Jogger in 44 seconds. And it's like, is there anything more practical than that? And I think like practicality also comes in terms of like price tag as well. The fact that you can have that car for, I think the one that I tested in the hybrid was like £22,000, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it's like 7 seats, hybrid engine, which was doing like 50 miles per gallon. The fact that like you can completely remove the back seats, store them away in storage. You've got the roof rails, which transform obviously from going like landscape to port. Like it's just, you just can't get more practical than that car. So that's definitely getting my practicality award. The best looking, I don't think you can get much. I think the best looking car on sale today is the Audi e-tron GT.
Yeah.
Must say,
I'm a massive fan of that.
It's an insane looking car.
Yeah.
And I think personally as well, I was very lucky to get very, very early access to a Porsche Taycan, because one of my friends bought one, and it was in lockdown actually when the channel was still pretty small, and he was like, "Hey Tish, like why don't we create some content on the Taycan?" So we did, and I loved it. Obviously, it was like, it's incredible. It's a Porsche at the end of the day, so it's going to be great. But I didn't realise how like more driver focused the Audi was. When I sat in the Audi, and it's like you're tunneled in, and it's like a proper cockpit, and it just feels like a fighter jet. It's just insane. And I think they've done an amazing job there at making that car like almost, I would say it's better than the Porsche Taycan. And then the best to drive. That's a really, really difficult one for me because
especially you experience a lot of cars, it's hard to pin it down. And I suppose cars give different driving experiences.
For sure, yeah, because you've got the cars that are kind of like very refined and comfortable and enjoyable to drive. I mean, the new Honda Civic Type R, that was fantastic. Like you've just recently, I know that you loved it as well, but the Alpine A110.
Yeah, absolutely love that car.
It's amazing, yeah. Like if you want proper stripped back driving pleasure. But of course, then you have the issue with the A110. Obviously, that car feels like it should have a manual gearbox. That's the only problem.
Yeah.
I think because it's like so stripped back, such a fun sports car. And for that reason, like for me personally, I think it's got to be the Toyota GR86 for that reason. Mm-hmm. Like that fun coupe, rear wheel drive, manual gearbox. It doesn't need loads of power. In fact, I think the best cars to drive sometimes don't have that much power because you have to like work them hard to get the best out of them. But yeah, I think, and then I've got to also say that I did think that I drove the Kia EV6 GT on the Hockenheimring, and we used the drift mode, obviously, because that car, they can send kind of, I think it's like 80% of the power to the rear wheels. So then that's like, as an EV, that's insane. So yeah, but ultimately, I do love a petrol car, do love kind of like a coupe sports car. So it's got to be the GR86.
3 very solid answers there. Well, thank you very much, Natisha, for joining us on this week's episode of the Let's Talk Cars podcast. Make sure to follow Natisha on all the social links. I'll make sure to put them all in the bio. And until next time, see you.